It's Aloha Thursday, 2 days to the big day. Woo! It's Breakfast with Bob.
Hey everybody, day 4, Breakfast with Bob. Thanks everybody for coming. 10,000 people out there in Speedos. Dave, that's pretty sweet. We're brought to you by HOKA, One, Polar, Halo, Neuroscience, Velofix, Today's Plan, Normatec, Four Seasons Resort, Hualalai, Triathlete Magazine, and we are a beautiful Huggo's on the Rocks. Our next guest, the first inductee into the Ironman Triathlon Hall of Fame, 6-time Ironman World Champion. Please give it up, Mr. Dave Scott. Legend.
Quite an intro, Bob. Thank you.
Well, so well deserved, man. I mean, think about it. Going back to 1980, when to be competitive at any event from 1980 to 1996, 16 years, is pretty impressive.
Well, the numbers were thinner at that time. They grew in the 80s. Of
They
course.
totally did.
They
The
grew,
composition,
so-
no. So we were just chatting about that. There's a lot of athletes now who are looking at, it's almost like they're doing Ironman events, Ironman racing, like they're running a 10K. Like doing a 5K. I interviewed Joe Skipper's done 3 Ironman in the last 4 weeks, or a month ago. And then Cam Wurf has done 15 over the last 2 years. What's your feeling about just this overload of racing, especially long-distance racing?
Well, I think it's a mistake.
Yeah.
For both of those guys and more.
And
others. And I've heard a lot of athletes that are trying to stack them together and do them back-to-back within a month's time. And I think historically we've seen the women rebound faster than the men. And even back when I was racing and kind of post-racing and watching Heather and Lori Bowden, quite often they would do Canada, and there would be a 12 or 13, 14-week break, and they'd come back and do well here. A lot of the men have difficulty turning that around, and I think at the end of the Northern Hemisphere year, when people are racing really year-round now, they come in a little bit beat up. And we're seeing that both on the women's side and the men's side, certainly at the pro level, and it's obviously permeating down to the amateurs. So there's a recovery period. I think there's certainly a recovery period physically. We know that they have elevated liver enzymes. There can be muscle damage, particularly if you're running. If you're doing it in 16 hours, I just say do it every week. And I'm not picking on the slower athletes, but they're not running. The eccentric load that you have on the run is really the damaging part. So the athletes that are going 12 hours or less are the ones that are going to have more damage week to week to week, and certainly recovering from Ironman races.
You know, the other thing, when I look at some of the athletes over time, world-class performances back to back to back. Perfect example, Craig Alexander, right? Wins 70.3 Worlds in 2011, and then breaks the Ironman course record. That was the 70.3 in September. In October, comes here, and you were working with him, and it goes 8:03. And that was when they instituted that if you were a champion, you had to validate by doing a full Ironman. And then less than 6 months later, he goes to Melbourne, Ironman Melbourne, and has a race with Cam Brown where he's forced to run 2:37 off the bike to win, and doesn't get away till the last 5K or so. And I think that put him over the edge in terms of, after that, he never had a successful Ironman distance, still successful 70.3. And we've seen that over time, that people sometimes, if you bunch world-class performances together over a short period of time, you could ruin your career.
That's a long question, Bob, but I'll try to answer your comment. I thought I was talking. I mean, you're just kind of giving the whole scenario. You're such a historian. I was kind of mesmerized by your history.
That was pretty good, though, right?
Yeah, it was. Well, you're always good. I agree with you. I'll answer, and I'll be really succinct with my answer, okay?
You're trying to say I wasn't succinct with my question.
That was a little bit long. I think, again, when we look at the time duration, and runners historically have kind of set the standard. When do the best running times occur with one athlete? And they're usually between an 8 to 12 week period.
Right.
If they break a record at 5,000, quite often they do it at 10, and a lot of them are going up to marathon, but it's hard to hold that peak, that pinnacle peak, for a long period of time. In other words, you can't string it out. Athletes can have good Ironman races, but are they great Ironman races? And again, what I said earlier about the women historically, they have done better over here with about a 12 to 14 week break in between. I don't like to see the men nor the women try to stack too many Ironman races back to back. And in your example with Craig, I think he was racing a lot and was, possibly unable to recover after that great race he did with Cam Brown.
So speaking of great races, you had obviously a lot of major wins here, but I think the races that mean the most to you, one coming back in '94 at the age of 40, and really proving a stereotype wrong that once you're 40 you can't be competitive anymore, and you'd been away 5 years, and you came back. What was the toughest part about getting ready to race against the best guys in the world when you hadn't really done that in 5 years, and now you were 40 years old?
Well, the first thing is I didn't really know I knew where the bar was as far as the athletes, but I didn't have a vendetta against them. It wasn't I'm going to come back and try to beat all the best guys. It was really kind of this quiet stream that I had just to see if I could get back to a really top level of fitness. But measuring against someone else, I didn't have that measurement. So to say I was nervous, absolutely. Was I intimidated? No, I wasn't. I just thought, well, I'll give it my best shot, and we'll see what happens. With a 5-year hiatus, so it wasn't ideal, but that was life. And
right.
I came back, and I was quite surprised, Bob, on the bike. There's a shot in the coverage that year, and it was about 40 miles into the bike. Or less than that, about 40K, 25 miles, and all of a sudden I had the lead. And, I was kind of surprised. I said, well, here I go. But and there wasn't a moment where I said, well, I'm going to win this thing. I just said, I'm in the lead, and I'm having a pretty solid day. Let's see how it unfolds.
And then 2 years later, you come back, and now your kids are older. They can sort of understand what you're doing, and they're going to be there and watch you.
Right.
Doing it with the family that year, was that pretty special?
Well, my daughter was a peanut. She was a few months old, so she doesn't have any recollection of anything other than the fact she doesn't want to have anything to do with triathlon. And my two boys, which became quite good athletes, they were over here, but they were still little guys. I think for them, they know the history of the sport, and they followed it. And my middle son, Drew, was a professional for a while. And so having them here, and I was 42, I silently thought, and I only said this to a few people, including my kids and friends, that maybe I can win this race in '96.
And that day, you had a swim, which for a lot of people would be considered okay, like 53 or so. But for you, it was beginning of not a good swim and definitely not a good bike ride. And when you're out there not having the day that you wanted to have, what was going through your mind as you came back to town on the bike?
Well, I started feeling sorry for myself early on, and kind of a silly feeling. And I think you tell athletes to keep your mind together, and I kind of lost mine. I didn't have a good swim, but I came out of the transition and said, "Well, I'm going to go after it on the bike." I felt strong on the bike, and I just didn't have the legs. I didn't figure out the puzzle on how to have my legs ready to ride, and I just felt flat. Finally, at about I think it was 80 plus miles, I had this resolve that. I had and I use this word a lot, I had the opportunity to run a marathon. And I said, man, this is amazing. I get to run a marathon, and I'm going to run it as fast as I can. So I had seen some of my family members as I'm coming in. I think they'd given up on me almost. And they had kind of this forlorn look like, what are you doing, Dave? You're so far behind. I thought I was in 50th. I didn't really know. I was in 26th off the bike. I found that out the next day. And when I got off the bike, it was just a new game. It was a new plan. It was no different than a workout. And I just thought some of those guys that caught me on the bike, I'm going to pass them. And I'm going to go by them and see how far I can go. And my initial goal was, if I can creep in the top 10, that would be a great day. Even though on paper, I have done reasonably well over here before that, and 10th didn't sound very good. So I was able to catch the 10th guy at about the halfway point on the run, and then the final 5, I caught the 5th guy at about mile 23. And, of course, I felt great. I knew the position I was in. I'd moved up from 26th to 5th. And I just ran out of real estate. I needed about a 90K run. I thought, well, maybe I catch that front guy, but they were too far ahead, 4, 3, 2, 1.
And you ended up running a 2:45 marathon off the bike. So, yeah, how about a round of applause? 2:45 marathon at the age of 42. I don't know if anybody's done that over here since. So, Dave, when you look at the field here, and I think the main deal is if I see a change in the sport, it seems that people are more aggressive on the bike, and maybe not necessarily here, but in other races when the pro field isn't as deep. Here you'll have a few. You'll see Cam Worf and some of the other guys go off the front. What when you watch it, how do you look at it? Do you feel they're being aggressive on the bike?
Well, I've mentioned this to several of the pros. I mean, the cycling times are just outrageously fast, and it becomes kind of a cat and mouse game. And I think a lot of the athletes lose their confidence on the bike, and they feel like they've got to go with the big engines out here. And so there's a lot of times, you look at the power files of these guys, they have many, many spikes in there where they're chasing or closing the gap or trying to hold someone off, where they're well above their VO2, which it's okay to go into that zone, but for the layperson, you've got about 20 minutes of this top end, and a lot of your energy is anaerobic. So they can do it, but it takes a toll. And by the time they're at about around 80 miles, and I've seen this attrition-wise, particularly with the men, there's a drop-off on that group of 15 to 20 that is seemingly in this front pack legally, but they have this accordion-like effect where they're accelerating, slowing down, accelerating, slowing down. And I was talking to David McNamee, who got third here last year, and he said, well, I want to be in that lead group. And I just said, and I told this to Craig a long time ago, I said, be in the top three always. Don't get out of that top three because you won't vacillate so much with your high end and then dropping back. And he actually commented, he said, yeah, I'm having to brake a little bit to be legal. And so I think it wears on people mentally. Certainly the physical toll is tough. And a lot of the athletes now are a lot faster than I ever was, and Mark. But they're unable to do it here in Kona on the run. So I think they just got to be a little bit wiser, and I'm hoping that they can have a great run, and certainly the men, I think there's 5 or 6 of them that should be in the 235, 236 range, yet to happen. And the women also have not run to their capabilities, including Daniela, a brilliant athlete, and I saw her in South Africa, phenomenal, but I'd like to see her at 250 or better. I'm sure Mirinda is thinking that this year as well.
So in South Africa, probably one of the better races that we've seen. When you have Alistair Brownlee and Javier Gomez and Jan Frodeno on the start line together, and I know you love great racing. How special was that to have a front row seat at that?
Well, it was the best race I've seen.
It is.
Yeah, the best race. And I think because those 3 guys historically had the record, everyone's eyeballing them. I wonder if it'll come down to this 3. And there were 9 getting out of the water, including those 3, and then it was whittled to 6. And Alistair had the same strategy that he's done in the Olympic distance. He just tried to blast everyone on the bike, but the other guys are strong. He finally slides back. And I knew exactly when he did this. I said, he's tired of leading. And so now it changed a little bit, but it came down to the run, and the runs were historic. And there was an interchange of all the 3 guys, and Jan had a brilliant day, and it was obviously disheartening to hear that he was out of this race.
Well, and along that same line, he had epic race at Oceanside, and then an epic race at Frankfurt, and then an epic race at South Africa, and then he's done. 3 epic performances in a short period of time. We're going to see some great racing, I think, on Saturday. I think we got a lot of guys. I think the men's field so wide open with Jan not in the race. It's going to be a lot of fun. Looking forward to watching?
Absolutely, Bob. No, it's, again, it's there's no predictable equation here in Kona. And we can take the top guys. Who are the top guys? And everyone can rattle off, and people in the audience can rattle off their top 5 or 6. But there's always a few that slide in. We saw Patrick Lange a couple of years ago. No one really knew who he was. And certainly going back to Christy Wellington, I remember I was covering the race, and she's out there without any sunglasses on or a hat. No visor, and smiling. And I kept calling her the wrong name. I don't know. I was calling her Christina or Chrisella or something, and I said, I don't know who this woman is, but she's darn good.
Speaking of darn good, how about a round of applause? 6-time Ironman world champion, Mr. Dave Scott.
It's Aloha Thursday, 2 days to the big day. Woo! It's breakfast with